Thank you very much. So I'm very excited to be here with Sara and Cal. So thanks everybody for joining. And we're here to talk a little bit about climate risk as a locational risk that resonates in a tangible way for buyers and investors, as an important aspect of the due diligence process and a way to respond to consumer demand for sustainability, but as well as this broad topic of, the corporate ESG focus and regulations. So my name is Andrea LeMay. I'm from BuildingMinds. We are a Berlin-based tech startup, and we're focused on making an integrated data platform for commercial real estate portfolios, really focused on ESG from a reporting and analytics through risk and cost prediction, and then actions and impact simulation, but really believing that data foundation is how we do it. So very excited to hear from Sara and Cal today from your perspective. So Sara, maybe to start with you to introduce your company and your role.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm Sara Maffey. I'm the head of corporate strategy and business development at LocalLogic, and LocalLogic is a location intelligence company. We were founded by urban planners, and we are able to quantify everything outside the four walls of the asset, from retail, transportation, schools, and then things you think of as being a little more subjective, like the vibrancy and wellness of an area.
Great, thank you. And Cal, if you'd like to introduce your company and your role as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Cal Inman, founder of ClimateCheck. ClimateCheck provides insights to climate risk on a local property level, and it's really about understanding risk of climate-related events. So within the E of ESG, we're a very specific niche, and it's considered physical climate risk, but we've been having fun and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Then I guess kind of continuing on those lines, Cal, if you could tell us a little bit more in depth on what kind of data and insights does ClimateCheck provide?
Yeah, I think we throw around a lot of jargon, right? Like climate risk, physical risk. But fundamentally what we're looking at is weather events and how they're changing into the future with the event of climate change. So specifically, what does that mean? We look at natural hazards like flood, fire, and high wind, and I kind of categorize these as real shock hazards that cause loss to homes or commercial properties. And then there's more stressor hazards or ongoing chronic hazards like extreme heat, which we were just talking about, extreme precipitation, and drought. So kind of ongoing stressors to your home, to your investments, to your portfolio. So on a high level, that's what we look at. We look at risk today, and then in the future in 5-year increments, kind of with a big benchmark at 30 years. And so we provide insights to really any stakeholder in real estate. So I think commercial real estate investors, lenders, and then down to the homeowner. It's really part of our mission to create transparency around this and provide the information to everyone. And we include the homeowner in that bucket.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And Sara, a little bit, if you could share about LocalLogic, what insights and products are you guys offering?
Sure. I think similar to Cal, we're really covering both the consumer, those listing portals on the residential side, and commercial developers and investors in real estate. So we're covering the full gamut. I think that another kind of similar way of looking at it is we're looking at locational risk and opportunity. So we understand everything around the asset. And I think if you link it to climate risk, it's really understanding the transitional risks associated with climate change and how that's going to eventually impact how these ecosystems of cities are going to change over time. So we have our location scores, which are really giving you a snapshot of, in a quantitative way, of what's happening around the asset. So all of those things can be impacted by climate change over time, but they also impact the transportation necessary to get from place to place. So I think as we start to think about the E and ESG, even just understanding sort of those scope 3 emissions that are really the impact of the location choices that you're making, really have a huge impact on your environmental impact over time. So.
And Cal, do you think people are thinking, more about locational risk or ESG when we're talking about ingesting climate risk data?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think we've seen our data used as an industry, climate risk data, probably starting by the equity investors, the equity part of the capital stack within commercial real estate. And I think the impetus originally it was really ESG kind of guidelines, right? Your LPs, your investors, whether they're pension funds or insurance companies, are saying, "Hey, we have these ESG mandates for everything we're investing in." And then, and E stands for environmental, right? Environmental has multiple pieces, right? You all look at emissions and tracking that, and we're very specifically looking at how climate change is affecting particular property, and that risk analysis fits cleanly into like existing due diligence that investors do, right? They're looking at all sorts of risk factors from entitlement, construction risk, environmental risk, demographic risk, how are jobs changing? So that already kind of fits cleanly into it. And I think it's kind of been adopted, and since it's becoming best practices, even for folks outside of kind of the ESG space. And I think homeowners, the same thing, right? We all get a termite report when we're buying a house or home inspection. So just investigating an asset you're buying and understanding what the risk is, this kind of data set fits cleanly into that. So I'd say both.
Okay. And can we talk a little bit, how is this data being used? So why are home buyers using this data?
Yeah, I think, same kind of with Sara and Local Logic, like folks want to know this information. There's demand for it. Opening conversation, we're all experiencing a different frequency and intensity of these events, whether they're floods, fires. So it's tangible and real to all of us. We're all sitting across the country and we're all kind of experiencing different things. And we read about it in the paper every day, right? There's, climate change, new studies coming out. So it's top of the fold in the news cycle. And so people want to know, people want to quantify these things that they're curious about. A lot of times the answers are intuitive, but let's put rails around it, quantify it, whether you're a home buyer or an investor, and then understand that risk and quantify it. So I think that's really how it's being used on all levels.
I think on the home buyer side, though, I think there's also just this increasing demand by consumers to understand their environmental impacts on the world, and being able to actually quantify that and see that as part of your home search process, I think is really key. You're trying to make these more socially and environmentally responsible decisions in all aspects of your life. And I don't think home buying is any different. And I think that's also why we're seeing some of these home search portals really adopting the climate risk data, because it's allowing consumers to feel empowered to understand that impact of their home buying decision. And it's also, I think on the portal side, creating more of like an SEO and stickiness to those portals, because it's really engaging customers with what they want to know today, when they're making that location decision. And I think the same thing kind of goes for all of our location score information. So it's like climate risk is one piece of understanding your location decision, whether that's a home or a much larger asset that you're investing in.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've seen just within the residential space, whether you're a realtor, broker, franchise, listing portal, there's a big movement for transparency around data and information in the home buying process, home selling process. And I think this is a natural kind of evolution of that. New data sets come out. Folks want to understand this information. They're hungry for it. The big portals aren't stupid. They do a lot of qualitative and quantitative research around what people want to know. And I think the numbers are there on user engagement. We're integrated on quite a few residential portals, and people are interested. They're clicking on it. They're reading through it. The page engagement is up. And to Sara's point, all that people want to know. That's the value. But it all how you quantify it is kind of engagement or SEO value, and there are definitely benefits to the portals and brokers themselves.
I think the other piece of it is there's so much out there right now about population migration. And so that's just that's adding like more risk, more uncertainty to those home buying decisions. If you're even moving within a market, you don't really understand your new neighborhood as well, and all the sort of long-term risks to this major investment that you're making as an individual. But I think the other piece of it is there's also implications with your mortgage underwriting and the insurance that you might be getting, because all of those kinds of companies are also really being mandated and considering that climate risk in those decisions, and it's going to drive rates. So I think, it really impacts like so many different aspects, whether it's your sort of personal responsibility in the world, or even just the financial impacts of the decisions you're making.
Yeah, that I think that makes a lot of sense. And I always, I love hearing this conversation, because I almost think of it as how nice to be able to, I remember walk score was such a big deal to me when I bought my house, but to be able to understand what I can do as a consumer from a climate perspective, and even understand when I even put my, looked at my address in your platform, it's so different. And it was different than I would have expected being in the Midwest and when I lived in Colorado. So I think it is really interesting to have that power as a consumer, and then also to see that broader impact from the investment side and agency side.
Yeah, totally. And look, this isn't some like doomsday, we all need to move to some location, but I think it's really about kind of protecting your asset, mitigating risks. And I think the first step to that is understanding what those risks are. And then you can take actions. It's not saying you necessarily need to move, or you're a seller and this asset has some risk that the buyer is not aware of. For the consumer, we provide a simple list of things that you can do to help protect your home from wildfire, harden your home, move your firewood away from the house. So what can we do to protect ourselves?
And how are the home search portals kind of creating value within this climate risk and locational data space?
Yeah, I think the fundamental value is providing information that consumers want to know. And I think the value for them is, again, engagement, SEO, new, unique, rich content. But I think that all that really comes down to is that folks are engaging with data and getting more information, and it makes those platforms stickier.
And Sara, I think you started to touch on this a bit, but then when we think about the commercial real estate developers and investors, how are they considering climate and location risk?
I think it is similar, because I think they're being squeezed on both sides. They're getting that tenant, that customer pressure to actually be transparent. And I think this is only going to increase, which with some of the SEC proposal language that's out there, but really being transparent about the climate risk that they have considered. I think it's also a piece of, are you going to be able to get that loan, get that investment in the property based on the location and the risk that's considered? Because as we talked about before, this needs to be a part of due diligence now, considering climate risk and really considering location risk, right? Like, just as you would want to understand how the submarket or market that you're investing in is going to change over time, and that potential upside or any kind of risk associated with that, I think climate risk is now going to be part of that table stakes due diligence that needs to happen at the beginning.
So this, to pivot, especially being an American and a European company that's looking at ESG regulations, we talk a lot about, ESG in Europe and how it's driven a lot by regulations, and maybe they're a bit even ahead of us in that way from the regulatory side. So what's happening with government regulation in the US, and how are these lenders and investors responding?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think, like I said, within the kind of investor portion of commercial real estate, this is becoming best practices, and everyone, there's a rush to ingest the data. And I don't think, maybe started, the impetus was ESG, but we saw it with phase 1 reporting and environmental due diligence. These things quickly become best practices. You don't want to be the last landowner with underground storage tank on your property, and be slammed with that when you sell the property. So we're seeing kind of the same evolution, but it has definitely accelerated with, the SEC signaling, this proposed climate risk disclosure. What does that mean? means that companies need to look at what their risk is to climate change is one of the pieces. What does that mean for the investor down to the homeowner? I think as we see lenders start ingesting this data, it's going to be imperative that we look at it too, right? The biggest part of the capital stack is the debt, whether it's your mortgage or your commercial loan. If your biggest partner is looking at this as a risk factor, it's important that we look at it too as investors. So we're seeing a lot of quick evolution in that part of the space.
And I would think, Cal, like your scoring of this makes it so much more easy to digest and actually get this kind of data in a way like earlier on in the process. At least that's what we've found is we've incorporated your data into our platform, that people are really appreciating being able to understand that risk earlier on in the acquisitions process.
Yeah, I think looking at a rating or some type of red flag is important, but I think also, beyond on that kind of screening, it's important to be able to dive deep and understand, what does 62 out of 100 mean? We'll see lots of rating systems and stuff, but we really pride ourselves in providing deeper information that's actionable. You can understand it. So what is the probability of a flood happening? What's the depth of the flood on the property? And so I think communicating that information in an easy to understand way, I think that's key. That's easy to understand for everyone. We're not all climatologists, and providing it and making it actionable is I think something that's resonated with a lot of our customers.
And it seems like that kind of consideration and reporting is really going to be required if this goes through with the SEC proposal. Yeah.
I think who knows with government regulation, but we're seeing a lot of traction regardless. And Andrew, I'm curious. I mean, you've seen so much. You guys have been in the European market, right? That regulation is much further ahead of the U.S. and obviously you guys have a lot of traction. They're a big foothold. And how do you see that playing out in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we're watching that really closely. I think even there's still a lot of regulation being clarified in Europe, and we'll even see, since we focus on global portfolios, the need to focus country by country. There's also, French standards compared to SFDR. So there's these different, and we're really trying to figure out how to tackle that with our customers. And they also have assets in the US. And I think they're expecting some of this to follow when you think about GRESP and some of these broader, more widely accepted standards. But it's still quite fragmented. And we're seeing those who decide to be first movers able to get ahead of that. And then it's much easier to adapt for your local standard. But we're watching it closely. I think it's exciting in a way to see some movement from the US, but it's also, if we can kind of be that first mover and lead with the market a bit more, maybe we can even get in front of some of the fragmentation we're even seeing with different standards in Europe.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because it is fragmented, and there's different things going in different countries, and there's a lot of different frameworks, right? You mentioned GRESP, there's UNPRI, ASTM, TCFD. The list of acronyms goes on, but
it's true. Yep.
It's the Wild West right now, which makes it fun. But I think it's important to have partners that are tracking all of that. And just keeping aware of it as it develops.
Yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of options out there. We've really been thinking about how our insights apply to many of those different acronyms, especially GRESP, as you mentioned, Andrea. I think that's really like sort of rising to the top in what we're seeing with how people are choosing to report. And so I think a lot of our insights around livability and transportation access, affordable housing, all kind of tie into some of that reporting that's being required. I think the other part about like this proposed SEC, regulations around climate risk, the other piece of it is the emissions piece. And I think all of this to me is just making it even more important that we decide location, like location, where we build, what we build, where is just becoming really critical, because it has that impact on not only your climate risk, but also your energy consumption or what is accessible around you. Like there's just so many different rings of impact that actually come from where you end up actually building something and what you choose to program that site with. So it's kind of exciting to just think about how location was always, you know, that adage of location, 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 but it was really about like creating demand and experience. But now it's really location, location, location from a risk perspective. So it's definitely a critical piece of the process here.
Yeah. And I think you both kind of mentioned this idea of how do we make it actionable and understandable, and even down to being able to make that location decision. I think that's a really important step in avoiding greenwashing. You know, that's something we talk a lot about at BuildingMinds, that these standards are important. And the intention's definitely there, and we're starting to see that momentum. But I think keeping it actionable in the way you're both talking about really helps us avoid that overselling the Go Green movement. So it's good to hear that it's keeping it in this really tangible space that we can see down the value chain.
Yeah, the greenwashing is interesting because, like, you know, there's some box checking out there, but I think it's good for folks, organizations, individuals to ingest the data, start understanding it, get familiar with it. I do think that will change over time, right? Like how we're using it and how actionable it becomes, but it needs to start somewhere.
Absolutely. So kind of along those lines of what's available now, but maybe a little bit of time on what's on your roadmaps.
Yeah. We got a lot of stuff cooking. We're doing a rollout in Canada right now, a lot of interest there, and then further kind of geographic expansion. And then just focusing on hazards that our customers are looking for. This month we're rolling out high wind, which is you know, a big factor and causes a lot of loss in buildings, and a myriad of other hazards. And then always refining how we're communicating the information, displaying it, and just making it easy to understand. So just kind of focusing on that, the product, and just in a very iterative process.
I think from the local logic perspective, I think the first thing coming on our roadmap is really more on the S side of ESG, where we're rolling out our wellness score, which I'm very excited about. I think it's a really important piece of those location decisions. And the next piece will be unveiling our historic location scores. So understanding how location has changed over time, and then getting into more predictive modeling, understanding how that ecosystem of place is going to change over time, because it's really, I mean, as we've talked about today, so interconnected. It's climate risk, but it's also just so many other aspects of the economy and all the different pieces that make up place. So that's really something that I'm looking forward to. And I think the last piece is just some of our more E-focused pieces of the roadmap, where we're going to be automating pieces of GRES reporting that I mentioned earlier, and really trying to understand the Scope 3 emissions impacts of location.
That's great. And how do attendees, if they want to learn more about each of your products?
I think the best way for us is just checking out locallogic.co. We've got lots of information on there, and you can easily get in touch with us.
Yeah, if anyone's interested, look ClimateCheck or any of the partners we're integrated with on our website. You can type in any address and kind of get an instantaneous data feed on what the risks are to your property. You can pull a free full report and understand more about the product, and yeah, all sorts of information there.
Great. Any questions from the audience?
So far, we haven't had anything come in yet, but feel free to submit your questions. We have a couple minutes, and we're happy to answer them for you. Okay. Is there anything that either one of you would like to add before we wrap up? Any final thoughts?
I'd say, like, all this talk of data, I mean, it can be overwhelming, but it is complex, it is multifactorial, and I think just starting to ingest it, understand it, and how kind of weaves together. The things Sarah's talking about, these rings of data and how it affects location. And look, we see this happening within commercial real estate, big investment shops, and I think what's cool is we're all trying to provide this data to everyone and in an easy to understand way. So it's fun, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys.
Oh, we do have a question in for Sara. What are the target partners for Local Logic? Is it commercial real estate investors? So 2 questions right there.
We partner with both residential and commercial sides of the industry. So we have a variety of consumer-facing products that you can see on sites like Redfin and Remax. And then, yes, we do have a platform that was developed specifically for commercial real estate developers and investors. And as Cal was just saying that earlier, I think that's like such a beautiful visual way of combining all of those data sources, including the ClimateCheck data, so that you can understand all those different aspects of place. And of course, all of our data is available via API as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. All right. Doesn't look like we have any other questions. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. It's been fun.